Both of you drew before we started. Kel Seliger, the incumbent, you will have 1 minute for your opening statement.
I took my experience as a small businessman to City Hall in Amarillo during that time, reduced property taxes 27%. Took that experience to the state senate in this last session, helped produce a budget as a member of the Finance Committee, reduced spending by $15 billion. And even in doing that, saw to it when the House of Representatives wanted to eliminate all public funding for Odessa College to get that funding back. Reduced spending by $15 billion and helped establish at very nominal cost, I believe, a new petroleum engineering program at UTPB that I think will be one of the top ones in the state of Texas. And the bottom line, I think, is worked hard for the area that I represent. It's been 26 counties, it's going to be 37 counties that are very important to the Texas economy. I've worked hard in public education. It was my bill that did away with the tax test, and we have more work to do on the STAR test. The next thing I work on the most that I think is of premier importance is water.
You're on time, Mr. Seliger. Mr. Rives?
Thank you. I'm Randy Rives. I'm running for Texas State Senate, District 31. The reason I'm running is our current senator has consistently scored low with conservative groups across the state. Empower Texas gave him a D+. Take Young Conservatives of Texas, rated him as a 50. They voted him as one of the top 6 rhinos in the state and one of the bottom 10 conservatives in the state. This district does not deserve that kind of representation. There's nothing against Mr. Seliger. I have nothing against it. This is just a philosophy difference between the two of us. And I'm Randy Rives, and I would appreciate your vote.
Okay, Robert?
This question for both of you, of course, public school finance is taking the spotlight for the legislature. And many people feel that testing is overemphasized in our public classrooms. Some even have proposed doing away with standardized testing. Do you support a change in the way students are evaluated? And if so, what would that change be? Mr. Seliger, we'll start with you.
Absolutely, I support change and have been the agent of change when we talk about doing away with the tax test. We have to make sure that our school districts are preparing the kids for the future. STAR test has done that to an extent. We have to continue to work on that to see that we have an accountability system that doesn't get in the way of teaching in schools. And that's why I was here for STAR application 2-3 weeks ago, because in the next session we need to address that to see to it that we have a good, effective accountability system that really measures progress or growth in those students and doesn't dominate the school year.
Yes, I would support change, and I think we have to start involving our teachers and our administrators and our parents to see what those changes need to be. We can't depend on strictly on government to make these decisions for us. That's part of what's wrong right now. We've got the Department of Education mandating tests, and our teachers are terribly dissatisfied. They're terribly underworked. They're terribly frustrated. And so we've got to figure out a new way to do this. And it's not going to come from the government strictly, although the government needs to be involved. We have to start asking people, what is going on with our kids, our young people, and our parents, and get those people involved.
If I might hold up just 1 second for both of you, is the STAR test any different than the tax test as far as what's mandated by the state? And I mean, to either one of you, what would you recommend?
Absolutely it is, because the tax test, if you can imagine, the tax test would take a kid that's in Algebra 2 and make them go back and study geometry for the tax test when they'd already taken geometry a year before. The STAR test is supposed to be testing on subject areas that are being taught now in schools. I think that's a big step. There are a lot of other areas that are also important, including changes where we need to quit testing kids that may be in comas or that get sick during the application of the test and things like that. A lot of improvement needs to be made.
Randy, I didn't understand if you were for the tax test or for the STAR test or for any test.
Well, the STAR test is better. I really think it is better. It's better than the tax because it does test you over what you have been taught in this year. And what the frustration of the tax was that people were frustrated because they were in the tax, they would test people, what you may have should have learned in the 8th grade in the 10th grade. So it's better. I'm just not completely convinced yet that that's the direction we need to go. I know there's something we need to monitor the young people with, but I'm not real sure that this STAR test is going to be the one that, if it continues to put pressure in the system and we don't get the results we desire, we're going to have to look at what we need to do. You know, when a kid sits around and does this all day, and then you tell them to look at a blackboard, we're losing kids that way. These kids are highly, I mean, my little 4-year-old grandson, if I don't watch it, he'll have some app on my telephone before I can turn around. Thank goodness they have passwords. So we have to start adapting to our young people. We have to start adapting to where they're at, not where we're at.
Your time is up.
This question is for both of you. The Texas school finance lawsuits will most likely be resolved by the time the 83rd legislature convenes. How do you think that the state itself should resolve the target revenue system that the joint lawsuits are calling inadequate? Senator?
First of all, we need to do away with the target revenue system. It is so flawed that it creates inequity in the system because some schools have a target revenue of over $8,000 and some less than $5,000. Our system should not be necessarily be driven by lawsuits. When we talk about formula funding, only 30% of school districts are on formula. That means the system has failed. Whether there are lawsuits or not, we have to go back and fix it. When you have some school districts that have $12,000 per child and some that have less than $500, that is an inequity. Is it a constitutional inequity? It doesn't matter. It's an inequity that says in some fashion that we value the education and future of some children more than others. We must not, we cannot do that. And those are going to be the tasks that we're going to deal with going forward, but not waiting for the courts. It's work that needs to be done now, and that's why we're having committee hearings next week to deal with just those issues.
I agree. I mean, I don't think that there's anything there that we don't need to be waiting on lawsuits, and we need to make sure that, I can tell you, the problem with our educational system is not the amount of money we throw at it. It is what we're doing with that money and how we're using it. A lot of unfunded mandates, a lot of requirements on our local school systems have caused them to distract them, and so like the $12,000, they may be where that money goes is what's important, not the amount. And we have districts that have low cost per student that are doing excellent, and we have ones that we're throwing $12,000 that they're not doing real well. So it's, you know, I just think that the problem's deeper than just where we're putting, how much money we're throwing into education.
Gentlemen, I have the next question. Water is a major concern not only here in West Texas, but certainly across the state. What role do you feel state lawmakers should play in addressing water shortage issues? Senator, you're first.
I have been one of the leaders in water policy because I represent a part of the state that is probably in one form or another going to be in water deficit for a long, long time. The statewide water plan is essential to fully implement, and the Water Infrastructure Fund is going to be important to fund for projects all over the state of Texas. Communities like Seminole recently have used that money from the Water Development Board. Some of the best planning going on today is at CRMWD in the city of Odessa. The city of Odessa right now is looking at a desalinization plant. The role that the state government should play is to support these efforts, because water is going to be a challenge for as long as people live in the state of Texas. It's going to be a challenge all over the state of Texas. Best thing that happened with the drought this year, they got people all over the state talking about water deficits, and that we must have answers for the entire state of Texas.
Mr. Reeves.
Yeah, I think we have to do a better job as a state having a state plan. That doesn't circumvent the need to have a local plan. Local governments and local communities need to be looking at what they're doing, but we also need to be telling the state what we need to do to help them out along that way. They probably know better than the state ever does about what they need as far as help in those areas. As far as I know, we don't have a real good state plan. I think it's coming up. I think it's going to be more important in the future because of the fact that as more and more communities are dependent on water that's not there, then we're going to have to come up with something that will, across the state and across the community, work for both. I think the state ought to pay for what is a state plan, and I think the local communities need to figure out how to supply their communities with water and ask the state for the help they need.
Gentlemen, you each have 2 minutes for your closing statements. Mr. Seliger, you're first.
I find it very interesting that my opponent talks about these report cards from these various groups and says, these are the benchmarks that are relevant to you as voters. I got 100% grade for something called the Texas Conservative Coalition. Should you make up your mind based upon that rating? No. You should make up your mind based upon what you've seen and the work that I have done on things like local government corporation that, quite frankly, tried to loot Ector County. It was my bill that passed in the Senate, that passed in the House, that stopped that. Let's talk about some other report cards. I'm endorsed by the National Rifle Association, a well-known liberal group. Texans for lawsuit reform, they must be anarchists. Groups like that and on and on and on, they don't sit around and just do report cards. They look at your work and how it affects Texans, how it affects their businesses, the Texas economy, and the schools. I'm proud of that record because it has been developed by input from local superintendents and local police chiefs and teachers and things like that. It's a record I'm very proud of. I'm very proud. There are 181 people in the state of Texas out of 25 million that have the privilege of serving in the state legislature. And it is a tremendous responsibility and one that we should take seriously every day. And I do and appreciate that opportunity. Believe that your mayor and your county judge would tell you that I have been responsive to local government who make the big decisions. It is the most responsive form of government. Our job is to support that local government. I've been in local government and realized that. I appreciate the opportunity to represent you in the Texas Senate and would appreciate your vote starting next Tuesday.
Mr. Rives?
Thank you. I appreciate you, Kevin, when you're here today. You know, I too have an A rating for the National Rifles Association. I mean, nobody is discrediting the groups that may have support Mr. Seliger. What I am afraid of is when we have young conservatives of Texas who have on their webpage that we have one of the top 6 rhinos in the state, or we have one of the bottom 10 legislators in the state, and where I hope that the next leadership for this state and this country comes from, I am really concerned about where we're going. 60% of the time, he's a conservative. D plus part of the time, he's a conservative. 50% of the time, he's conservative. I'm sure you can part the. I too have met with lawyers for lawsuit reform. I encourage and am really supportive of what they're doing. But I can tell you that my concerns are not what he has done conservatively, it's what he hasn't done conservatively. I'm Randy Rives, and I'm not a D plus or 60% conservative, and I would appreciate your vote.